and welcome to DCA. I just have a few things to say before we move to the formal agenda for today's meeting. The formal legal standing of the meeting. This meeting is being held under government statutory instruments, local government, England, the local authorities, coronavirus, flexibility of local authority meetings, England, regulations 2020. To take account of these regulations, Bristol City Council has produced a set of virtual meetings procedure rules, and these are available on our website. This means that the decisions made by the committee will have the same standing and validity as if they had been made at a meeting in City Hall. Members of the public who have submitted written public forum statements, I can confirm that your statements have been circulated to all members of the committee prior to the meeting. They have read them and they will be taken into account when the decisions for each application are made. Some of you have requested to address the committee concerning your statement and have been provided with details on how to do so. You will be held in the waiting room for this meeting until it is time to address the committee, and you will then be invited in to do so. Please note that you only have 1 minute to speak. After you've finished speaking, you will be removed from the meeting, but will still be able to view it via the public broadcast on YouTube. Members of the public, although you will see a number of different people on your screen during the course of the meeting, only myself and the other councillors will make the decision on each application. If members of the committee could please make sure that you mute yourself when you're not speaking, so that we avoid unnecessary background noise, and also that you please make sure that your title is on the screen. I think everyone is, so that members of the public are clear who the councillors are. And also, can you use the virtual hand when you want to speak to me? And I will do my best to follow that. Moving a vote. When moving a vote, would you please indicate as above you wish to speak and wait until I ask you to speak. Please then clearly state what you are moving, particularly for the benefit of the public. The first vote for each application should of course be the officer recommendation. If you are seconding a motion, please again clearly indicate you wish to speak and wait for me to call you. This again is particularly for the benefit of the public, and you will notice that in the agenda pack there is a copy of the procedure which members of the public can see from home. Voting. What I will do is I will call each councillor by name. Please state if your vote is for, against or abstain. And what I will do is I will work around the screen as I see you. That's the only way I can actually make this work. I've tried other systems and that one does work. It may look odd from your end, but believe you me, it's the only one that works. Any questions from councillors? No? Great, thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence and substitutions?
One apology, Chair. Richard Eddy, substituting for Councillor Steve Smith.
Louder, I'm afraid.
Richard Eddy is substituting for Councillor Steve Smith.
Richard Eddy for Councillor Steve Smith. Welcome, Councillor Eddy. Any other apologies? No.
Steve Clark asked me to pass on his apologies.
Oh, we do have apologies from Councillor Clark, Steve Clark. Thank you. Okay, do we have any declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the previous meeting held on 8th of July 2020. Are we happy to agree those as a correct record? No hands up. Oh, sorry, I have Councillor Hickman. Your hand is up. I apologise. I've just seen that.
It's fine. I just thought I ought to say that they are both very important planning applications, and they're both in the ward I represent. So I have been at meetings, particularly about the one in Silverthorne, but I haven't. I'm coming here with an open mind.
Thank you, Councillor Hickman. Jeremy, you got that, did you? Thank you very much. Apologies for not seeing the little blue hand at the bottom. So we're okay to approve the previous minutes? Yes, thank you very much. And we have Peter with us today because Gary is away on holiday. So welcome, Peter. Would you like to just go through the appeals and highlight anything that you feel is of importance to us?
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to go through them. I was going to just ask for any questions on the list that you've been provided with.
Equally. Everyone, questions, anyone? Happy silence. No hands up. Thank you. Similarly with enforcement, anything you'd like to highlight, Peter, or anything anyone would like to ask questions about?
No, Chair. Again, any questions, please pass them through. Thank you. Okay, that seems to be okay. Public forum, what we will do as normal is I will take the statements before each item as usual. So we move now to the first item on our agenda, which is 19/03867/P Silverthorn Lane. And we have a number of people who have asked to come and read their statements, and you will have 1 minute to speak. Just to re-emphasise that all of the statements that have been sent in have been circulated to councillors and read by them and will be taken into account whether or not you feel that you want or are able to speak publicly at the meeting. But we do welcome those who, as we can see, have asked to come and speak.
Fiona Lynch has now been admitted to the meeting.
Fiona, welcome. Welcome to the meeting. Would you like to give us your statement, please?
Unmute myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I speak to you today as a school governor in Lawrence Hill Ward, representing primary education in the community of East Bristol. But more importantly, I'm here to represent the voices of parents and children from our community. There is a high level of concern and anxiety amongst parents in our community about the provision of meaningful choice for secondary education for our children and the availability of local, high quality secondary school places not being met. Currently, there's a predicted shortfall of over 200 places for September 2021. And it's not good enough to imagine tacking on extra provision or stuffing children into porta cabins in already existing overstretched secondary schools. But the redevelopment scheme of Silverthorn Lane with the new Temple Quarter Secondary School at the heart of this inspiring new development would give the children of Redfield, Easton, Lawrence Hill and Barton Hill an amazing opportunity to access high quality education in a new school that's local to them, in an area that will undoubtedly form a bridge to connect them to the city centre with its close links to businesses and the university campus, which will inevitably broaden their horizons and future aspirations. Access to education at this new school in the redevelopment scheme is highly likely to directly affect their life chances.
Fiona, thank you. I think your time is up. Much appreciated. Made your point very cogently. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Amy Harrison. Is Amy admitted to the... Amy, you're muted, I think.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you and you've got 1 minute. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you. I'm speaking to you today on behalf of BS5 Secondary Forum, a parent-led community group representing the children and families of East Bristol. We believe the Silverthorne Lane development will bring tangible benefits to our local community in terms of jobs, accessible public space, and most significantly, the delayed and much needed community assets of a new secondary school. Existing secondary provision is at capacity, and as we've heard, there are 200 children in our community with no secondary place next year. The children of our neighbourhood experience some of the highest levels of deprivation and inequality in the city. The impact of COVID-19 has compounded this. Access to a high quality secondary education is essential for their future life chances. They need and deserve the Oasis Temple Quarter School. Our local community is also the most ethnically diverse in the Southwest. I speak to you today acknowledging my own white privilege. And following the Black Lives Matter campaign, we all have a part to play in challenging the structural inequality that still exists in Bristol. Enabling young people from our diverse community access to high quality secondary education on a par with those living in other Bristol postcodes is a positive way to progress racial equity in the city. The children of East Bristol have no voice or agency in this process. So on their behalf, we request that you put their interests first when you cast your vote today. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you. Our next person is Ali, and I'm sorry, is it Einon or Enon? I don't know how to pronounce your surname, I'm afraid, Ali. Are you there? Are there? Hi, Ali. Ali, can you unmute, please?
Hi, can you hear me now?
I can, and I apologise, could you tell me how you pronounce your surname?
Oh, it's Einon.
Einon. Thank you very much. So I'm kind and I apologise again. And you have 1 minute to give us your statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ali Einon, Oasis Academy Temple Quarter. We believe every child can excel. We believe that every child should be able to go to their local school regardless of gender, faith or ability. We believe that a child's destiny should not be determined by demography, but by hard work and passion, nurtured in a school which knows its pupils and families and supports them every step of the way. Oasis Academy Temple Quarter will be this school, one of scholarship, enrichment and community. In the heart of the Enterprise Zone, our school can harness the rich opportunity of the surrounding area for the benefit of our pupils, our families and the city. Real life experiences of work and learning will empower pupils to navigate their futures with confidence and optimism, and community partnerships will ensure that our building is loved and used as much by our friends and partners as it is by our pupils. In approving this application, you can provide certainty for young people and their parents that this much needed school can be delivered. We cannot wait to get started and seek your support.
Thank you very much, Ali. Thank you. And our last person is Markham Hanson. So let me look and see. Markham.
Yes, I'm muted now.
Welcome,
sorry.
welcome. Yes, yeah, I can hear you. You have 1 minute, please, to give us your statement. Thank you.
My name is Markham Hanson. I'm the Managing Director of Square Bay. We control and manage Feeder Estates LLP. We are incredibly excited at the prospect of regenerating Silverthorne Lane with your support today. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to transform this derelict site that has turned its back on the city for generations into a vibrant new canal-side community, providing new homes, employment opportunities, a much-needed new school for 1,600 young people in communities like Lawrence Hill and Barton Hill, all part of an environment with sustainable travel at its heart. Our plans are a culmination of 3 years of hard work from ourselves, council officers and stakeholders. We are really pleased with the way the scheme for this complex site has evolved through positive engagement to one that is recommended for approval by council officers. I hope you will agree with the officer's recommendation and give us the green light to get on with this important regeneration project, providing desperately needed new homes, employment for 4,500 workers, and the facilities to transform the lives of young people in Bristol. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. We now move to the officer report from Lewis. Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, I think
Good.
so.
I shall try and share my screen. Just bear with me a second. Right, can everybody see the presentation slides?
Yes.
Good, good. Yes, so I'm before you today presenting a hybrid application for the development of Silverthorne Lane. The application is spread over a number of plots, and I think what I'll do is I'll go through the plots individually rather than trying to explain it all up to this slide. It is a very complex application. It involves multiple uses and multiple planning issues. I'm very aware that if I tried to go through all of the issues in a great deal of detail, you'd be listening to me for far longer than anybody would want to listen to me. So I'll try and keep it relatively brief and to the point. But there are two issues that I probably need to look at in a bit more detail. And those are probably the two more contentious issues of flooding and heritage. And I just want members to be entirely comfortable that they understand the issues regarding that before coming to a conclusion on the application. I've just got a few matters of housekeeping to do before I go on with the presentation properly. Firstly, there is a listed building application that goes with this application. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's uncontentious, but we are content to make a delegated decision on that, subject to the resolution of this application. So that application isn't before you today, only the hybrid application is. Turning to the report, there's three things that I just need to bring your attention to in the report. Three errors on my part, I'm afraid, but two errors on my part. But one is if you have the report in front of you, in the heritage section on page 58, there's reference to MPPF 2018. Obviously, we are now working to the MPPF from February 2019. So that was just a typo on my part. And then on page 74 on the flooding section, there's a quote there which purports to be from the MPPF about the provision of safe access during a flood event. That actually comes from the MPPG rather than the MPPF. So another typo in the report. And finally, in respect to the report, page 78, there's a list of the heads of terms for the legal agreement. Negotiation on some of those issues are still ongoing. The principle has been fully accepted and agreed with the developers. There is still an issue over the trigger point for the housing, the affordable housing review clause, and it just needs a bit of tweaking to take account of how the application is structured. It doesn't. I don't think the recommendation in that part is wrong as such, but just to make members aware of that we are continuing to discuss that point. And finally, before I go into the presentation, I'll draw your attention to the update sheet There's two further representations in there, one objecting to the design of the student accommodation on plot 6, and the other from the Environment Agency maintaining their objection to the application. And because of the Environment Agency's objection, the recommendation will now have to be that if you resolve to grant planning permission, we will have to refer the application to the Secretary of State before making a decision. What the statutory instrument requires that we give them 21 days to call in the application before making a decision. We'll apologise. There are some children next door to my house who are making some rather loud noises. So if that's coming across, I can assure you it's not my children. It's somebody else's. But I'll try and hopefully it won't cause too much disruption. Right, onto the actual application itself. So as I say, it's a hybrid application split over 6 plots. You can see those plots labelled on this plan. It's essentially a long, thin site which runs along the northern canal edge of the feeder canal. As hopefully you'll be aware of where it is. St Philip's Causeway is to the east. To the west is, or directly to the west, is Motion Nightclub in the old Marble Mosaic building, and to the west of that is the university's site for a new campus, and then the Temple Mead station. And I've just sort of put a slide in there which shows this general massing slide along the feeder. I don't know how useful that is to people, but gives you an idea of the general scale of the development we're looking at here. So we come on firstly to plot 1, which is an application for outline permission for a new office stroke education building. It's understood that this is being brought forward on behalf of the university to enhance their campus offer. At the moment, we have no details really of what that building is going to be used for, hence the outline nature of the application. We're being asked to approve the access to the site, but the other matters are reserved for later consideration. However, just a note on that, the indicative drawings you have in front of you will set the maximum parameters for any development on that site. Plot 2 to 4. So plot 2 and 3 are the provision for residential accommodation, and that's for 371 flats, mixture of largely 1 and 2 bedroom flats, but with a few studios and 3 bedroom flats included in that. As part of that offer, there's 73 affordable housing units, and they are to be provided to the east of the site in the donut-shaped building, which is located to the east. It is understood, although not something we have control over necessarily, that the other units will be offered for private rent. Yeah, those are the finger buildings which run away from the canal in that direction, with a car park provision underneath those blocks. The other part of plot 4 is the conversion of the grade 2 listed building. Sorry, just flick through elevations of the residential units there, and elevations of the office building. So this would convert the remnants of the grade 2 listed building, part of which was partially destroyed in a fire some years ago. You'll know it as the Ardman warehouse, I expect, and other bits of it were sort of derelict before that. So the proposal would be to rebuild from those elements that do remain and to use those buildings as offices. Plot 5 is the school. You've heard reference to that already, and support from local people highlighting the need for a school. As was indicated, the school will provide places for 1,600 pupils across years 7 to and 6th form. So what's that, 7 to 12. It so there's the elevations of the school building. It's kind of a C-shaped building on the plot, and there's just some illustrations of it. The boiler house is again a grade 2 listed building, currently used for warehousing, and the two pictures on the right show you a conversion into the sports facilities for the school, or the indoor sports facilities for the school. And finally, plot 6, which is again full details for student accommodation spread over 2 blocks. That will provide 693 student beds. You can see a sort of indicative layout there. Essentially, the layout continues up the blocks with a few sort of alterations. But they're a mixture of cluster units around relatively generous sort of kitchen, dining room areas, and a few studio units on each floor. And there's the elevations of the student accommodation. It goes up to a maximum of 17 stories, and there are some views later in the presentation which shows you what that looks like in the sort of wider context. So I'll come now to the 2 more contentious issues, if I may. This is a very complicated slide, but it was included with your packs, I think. So hopefully you will have had a chance to have a look at it. I'll just start by saying that, as I said earlier, the EA are maintaining their objection to the application. And in our latest correspondence with them, they have raised 4 particular issues which they think are, or their representations state are still outstanding. And if I may, I'll read these out just to make sure that you are sort of aware what they actually are. So the EA's objections, as I say, there are 4 comments here. The first, that the development is in a high risk of flooding and in an area of high risk of flooding, and could be impacted by considerable hazardous flood depths over the lifetime of the development. The development is in a place where there is an absence of strategic flood risk management infrastructure to reduce flood risk and mitigate detriment, such as increasing flood risk elsewhere. The development precludes safe operational access to the feeder canal, which is required in the interests of flood risk management. And finally, it fails to demonstrate flood risk will not be increased elsewhere. Our view as officers of the council, as opposed to the Environment Agency officers, is that there are still some outstanding issues in respect of flood risk, but we feel that they can be in large part dealt with through conditions on a planning application, which would allow us to take forward a recommendation for approval. I think it's probably worth me explaining the flood risk, how the developer has tried to mitigate it, and hopefully you'll understand how we've got to the position we've got to. So firstly, the preferable position, and this is the position that the EA are promoting, and rightly so, in my view, is that the site would be protected and defended in a flood risk event. Ultimately, the preferable position is that the design of the proposal will stop floodwaters coming onto the site, or at least coming onto the parts of the site which are in use. The issue with doing that is that you can't really do that in a piecemeal way, because once you seek to defend one part of the site or one part of an area from flooding, so if you're stopping floodwater getting into one area, it will go somewhere else, and that will increase flood risk elsewhere. Any piecemeal proposal on those grounds is likely to fall foul of the test of will it increase flooding elsewhere. So rather than going down that route, which arguably would either have the consequence of significantly reducing the developable part of the plot, or would require works outside the scope of this application. So rather than going down that route, the applications come forward with a more managed flood risk management type scenario. And what that essentially means is that parts of the site will be allowed to flood. And in some places that will be flood water of a significant depth. So drawing your attention to this slide, I would just point out, this slide is the flood risk, the 1 in 200 year flood risk in 100 years time. These are the flood design flood levels that the developers have been asked to design to. There is a caveat on that, in that the actual design flood levels, what we're asking developers to do has changed on at least 3 occasions during the course of this development. So I have some sympathy with the developers who have had their goalposts moved a few times. And there is still some argument that actually what this doesn't represent, therefore, is the absolute worst case scenario. So this is more of a sort of medium assessment on what the risk will be. Notwithstanding that, the worst case scenario, all of the floor plates for the residential and the student residential would be above the flood level as currently calculated. Even if we were to take into account the worst case scenario, the site is protected to a degree. And what this slide aims to show is what the flood depths will be in that 1 in 200 flood event in 100 years time, and that predicts the flood level to be at 1017 AOD, and you can see there what the levels are on the site, which range from 8 meters to on the student accommodation, it's on the school, it's about 9.6 meters above AOD. So that's the ground level. As I say, what the applicant has sought to do is to raise the floor levels, so that the floor levels of all but the listed buildings where we can't raise the floor level significantly, the floor levels of all the buildings would be above that flood level. There's a two-pronged approach here, basically. That is, parts of the site will continue to operate when the site is flooded. And key to this is that the residential is, as I say, raised up across the whole residential piece, and also the provision of a walkway which will allow access and egress to the site for all of the residential elements, and plot 1 in a flood event. And you can see that that's highlighted on the plan in red and then purple, what that route is. The other element to the flood management process is that because the worst of the flooding is tidal rather than fluvial, what that means is that we will have a reasonable degree of clarity of predicting flood events. So we'll be able to predict a flood event at least, well, I think the indication is about a day in advance. So commercial buildings, the school, etc., will just be closed. Obviously there'll need to be a robust plan for stopping children getting to the school, stopping people to get into the offices. But that's the management process that is intended for those elements. And what the applicant has put forward, and the argument that we accept, is that that will largely mitigate the risk to people in a flood event. So just to come on to that flood risk walkway. So just to emphasize, The red element, if you like, on that slide is the flood risk walkway, which will be built into the existing infrastructure of the site. That is part of a raised pavilion across that part of the site. The purple element will be a separate element, which will be raised up running past the school. And the applicant has provided some indicative drawings, but we will be seeking to secure the final details of this walkway through a condition. You probably can't make that out, but that's just the sort of detailed drawings which shows levels and things of how that walkway works. It runs up to the public right-of-way, which runs along the side of plot 6, and then around underneath the bridge. In order to make it safe underneath the bridge, there's the need for a floodgate, which would be within the highway. Highways have accepted in principle that they would accept a floodgate in this location, but obviously that will need to be designed to a point where the Highways Authority are happy with that. So that's the approach that's been taken. That deals with the issue of flood depths and how you get into and out of the site in a flood event. Just to be clear, the remit of the Environment Agency and the remit of us as local lead flood authority is slightly different. Our remit, so BCC officers' remit, is ensuring that safe access is provided in a flood event. And as you will have seen in the report, our officers have now removed their objection. They feel that this walkway, in principle, subject to design details, would provide the level of access that they would be happy to support. The other issue raised by the Environment Agency is about flood mitigation and impact on flood elsewhere. Now, in this case, the modelling shows that the floodwaters again in a 1 in 200 flooding event in 100 years' time would not impact on neighbouring sites, would all be mitigated within the site. The concern the Environment Agency seem to have is that this will require flooding of voids underneath plots 5 and 6. So that's the school building and the student accommodation. So both of those elements have been designed with a void underneath parts of the building up to about 1.5 metres in height, with a railing along the void, which will allow floodwaters to get into and out of uninterrupted. Now, the Environment Agency have said that they're not happy with that because there is a danger that those would be filled by human action, or would become clogged by debris in a flood event or something like that, and would have the impact that would result in floodwater impacting elsewhere. Having said that, we are aware that this type of flood mitigation has been used in other places. Whilst the Environment Agency have commented that there are material circumstances why those particular proposals have been allowed, there isn't a clear sort of policy basis for making any sort of determination on that. Obviously it would fall as part of the flood infrastructure works that the occupants would need to maintain during a flood event, or before a flood event. Both of these plots would be in single ownership, so we would have a reasonable degree of certainty about who's responsible for these elements. And our proposal is that this would form part of the suite of conditions on the application, that as part of the flood infrastructure works, that these voids will be maintained to allow floodwater to access and egress. In addition to that, the parts of the site have been lowered, notably the Mugas on plot 5, which would allow additional floodwater betterment, in effect, floodwater access to the site, and would mean that the use of the voids, the flood would have to be particularly significant before the voids come into play. And finally, on the flooding thing, apologies, this goes on a bit, but I need to cover all of these issues. The other concern raised by the Environment Agency is access to the canal side in the event of a flood. In order to maintain and potentially carry out works to make the site secure from a flood event. At the moment, the site is maintained from the canal side. It's maintained from the water, so there isn't access to the canal side at the moment. Having had discussions with the environment agencies and the developers, they have now provided additional access to the canal side, largely on plots 5 and 6. The scope for doing so on plots 2 and 3 is limited because of the next issue, which is heritage, and to provide access to the canal side on plots 2 and 3 would mean the removal of additional heritage assets. There is a need for conditions to make sure that access is maintained, and details, particularly where the walkway is in place, about how that access is actually going to be provided. But again, our view is that conditions will meet the tests and will deal with the issues raised by the Environment Agency. So in essence, that is why we've come to the view we have, which is contrary to the position put forward by the Environment Agency. The other issue I wanted just to talk to you on is heritage. The site includes a number of heritage assets, or includes and is adjacent to a number of heritage assets. So that slide in front of you broadly is the purple is a grade 2 star listed building, but it sits just outside the site, but will obviously the development will impact on the setting of that building. The light blue are elements which are grade 2 listed. The orange and yellow elements are essentially curtilage listed fabric. So they are listed by virtue of being associated with a listed building. The curtilage listing doesn't in itself demonstrate that those buildings have merit, but it is argued by our conservation officers, and you'll see comments from the likes of the Council for Industrial Archaeology and other parties, Victorian Society, etc., that those elements do have merit because of they demonstrate how the industrial development of this site actually happened historically, and how it evolved through the history of industrial activity on this site. So there is some merit, we think, in keeping those structures. In large part, those yellow buildings, which sit on plots 2 and 4, will be removed as part of the application. The canal side walls will be retained, and there are elements in the design which reflect the footprint of those buildings, and are intended to give a visitor to the site some understanding about how those buildings would have been historically. There is, as you'll hopefully have seen in the report, some commentary on the hammer forge, which is the oldest part of the site, and as shown in the current proposal, only the wall facing Silverthorne Lane would be retained. Historic England have asked for further, for the applicants to undertake further works to see if more of that can be maintained, and again we're recommending a condition to deal with that. So this is just what those buildings look like. Again, the the pictures on the left-hand side of the site are those curtilage listed buildings which are currently allocated for removal. As I say, the intention is to retain the riverside wall, which you can see on the bottom slide, but everything else on that slide would largely be removed. The other slide you'll see, which is the gable end, that's part of plot 4, and that's the part of the site which is intended for retention and for redevelopment into offices. And if I just skip back through the slides, I'll show you what that looks like in the proposal. Apologies, there we go. So that's the gable end there that you just saw in the photo. And I've just there's a visual impact assessment was submitted with the application, and this shows you the impact on those listed assets that I've talked about. As I say, the Canal side wall, you can see there, which is curtilage listed and will be retained. The other buildings will be removed and it developed behind, with the riverside walkway going along the rear of the Canal side wall. This is the same view from the other side, essentially, and you can see in the foreground the school building. Now this is a view from the railway. So this is the building you can see in the foreground there is the boiler house, which is intended for retention and to be used in association with the school. One of the comments that has been made by Historic England is that the proposed student accommodation would impact on the setting of that building from that view, and you can see that that's reasonably stark in that view. I suppose the commentary we would probably make on that is that's a moving view. That's that's a view from the I think that might actually be from the road rather than the railway, but it's from transport infrastructure, so it's something you will view as you go past the site. And obviously the further closer to Temple Mead you get, the more of that building will be revealed. The applicant has also made some amendments to the student accommodation, which better reveals that building in that view. And then a view from St Philip's Causeway, which shows the tower, which is the student accommodation. This is the Grade 2 star listed building, which is outside of the application site. It has a particularly sort of interesting roofscape and turrets. We feel that it would be preferable for that for the outline of that building to be retained, i.e. for no buildings to sit directly behind that. However, the proposal has come forward and it will be visible in that view, although again, this would be a view walking towards the building, and in some points it would be more visible than others. So for those reasons, we do feel that the proposal does result in harm to heritage assets. It's not agreed by everybody the degree of harm that's proposed, but the view of Historic England and the view of our city design team is that degree of harm is less than significant, but a high degree of less than significant. So significant harm basically means you say no to the development unless it's very exceptional circumstances. Less than significant, in order for development to come forward, it has to pass 2 tests, essentially. And those tests are, one, that any harm to the heritage asset requires clear and convincing justification, and 2, that the public benefits of the scheme outweigh the level of harm proposed. So we've taken the view that you could reduce the level of harm in respect of the impact of the buildings, but in order to do so, that would have a significant effect on the quantum that could be achieved on the site, and ultimately the what that does would mean that that high density residential scheme that is currently proposed would not be deliverable. It would be a much lower density residential proposal. Obviously, that brings into doubt the viability of the scheme, and also a lot of the other benefits that the scheme provides could not be provided if we started really knocking back that impact. So it's for those reasons that we feel that the justification has been provided. There are lots of benefits of the scheme, as we know. You know, the provision of the new school, which in accordance with national policy has to be given a great deal of weight. Provision of affordable housing, and economic activity. So again, it's a balance. Members have to try and balance these issues, but we as officers have come down on the side of supporting the scheme. Just before I go to the conclusion, I'm sure you're, as I say, I'm sure you want to get on with the discussion, and I'm happy to take questions on these issues or any of the others. I'm aware that the application does raise a number of other issues, and they are covered in my report. I have included in the slide package slides which show the highway works. I don't intend to explain those in any detail, but the highway officer is available if members want to look at those highway works and want to discuss anything that raises. So in just concluding then, our recommendation would be to support the scheme, but as I said earlier, that would need to be referred to the Secretary of State if members agree with the officer recommendation. Members in coming to a conclusion on the scheme have to apply planning balance. So we are not saying here that all of the issues are resolved to the complete satisfaction of all officers. In fact, issues over flooding and heritage are still, there is a balance to be reached on that. There is a degree of harm and degree of risk, but there are also benefits and mitigation in place. So if members are minded to support a scheme, it's important that we acknowledge that there is harm and there is risk, but the officer view is that the benefits of bringing this development forward would outweigh that. So I'll pass over to Chair now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lewis. Would you mind clearing the screen, please, just so I can see the members? Thank you very much. Okay, well, we move to questions now. It was very comprehensive. Thank you, Lewis. Could you please indicate with your virtual hand if you have a question, please? Okay, Councillor Stevens first then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Officer, for very comprehensive write-up and picking out the salient points. I've got a few questions that sort of depend on your answers, really. Firstly, obviously, we really need a school here. Can we just go ahead with the school and say, because that seems to be the one that will be least problematical flooding, because you shut it, they make sure everything is up at a higher level and you get the cleaners in, perhaps. Is that, so question one is, can the school be progressed without giving permission to everything else?
As you will be aware, we, as the planning authority, have to determine the application in front of us. So the application is for a mix of uses. We have looked at and got legal advice on whether it's possible to essentially subdivide the application and approve elements of it and approve other elements of it. The legal advice is that that would be a high risk strategy, but there's very little case law, but it has been done by other authorities. But really that only is an option for us in respect of, well, I would say it's probably not an option for us, but if members wanted to go further in that route, that would perhaps be an option in relation to plot 6, because that is largely subdivided from the rest of the development. Plots 2, 3 and 4 and 5 kind of operate together. So it would be difficult to approve plot 5, but not plots 2, 3 and 4.
Okay, and plot 5 is the school and
Yes.
plot 6 is the student accommodation. Okay, let's move to flooding. And you've made it very clear that we can't follow the preferred option, which is to have protect the site and defend it. So therefore we have to go to the option where we're going to allow certain areas to flood. Not today, but 30, 50, 100 years time. I'm just trying to get a feel for how the evacuation plan might work. And starting from the lowest area, the Environment Agency in the report you sent out yesterday said there was an area of car parking at 7 meters.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining that if I'm living in a house higher up and I know a flood's going to happen tomorrow, I'm going to get in my car and park it somewhere on higher ground. So how many car parking spaces would that be? Or is that planned to be, and where would they park?
So that reference to the 7 metre AOD is in relation to plot 1, which is the university building, university in inverted.
Oh, okay.
So that's a commercial building. That's that part of the proposal is not fully detailed yet, but ultimately that building would be closed and nobody would, they'd leave their cars at home. The residential element currently provides 100 parking spaces, and yes, in a flood event, there would be a need to evacuate the car park of the residential part of the development, and those cars would have to find alternative arrangements. I mean, it's not beyond the wit of man to find, for example, a high-rise car park within the city centre and make some arrangements to allow those cars to be parked elsewhere. But I suspect it will be a mixture of that and and parking on streets outside the flood area and those sort of elements.
No, but you've helped me assess the risk there, Lewis, because it's the offices that's at 7 meters.
Yeah. And
therefore they just don't come to
to
work in their car. It's their own problem if it ends up floating away. So moving on then, this is tidal flooding.
Yeah.
Does it take account of lots of water coming down the Avon from Bath and further away and a tidal surge combined? Is that what makes the 1 in 200 year event?
I guess I'm not sure I'm entirely qualified to answer that question, but the modelling is based on a pretty thorough understanding of how that watercourse operates in a flooding event. And what it shows is that there are peaks and troughs. So it's tidal. There'll be a peak which will be 2-3 hours or something, and then those peaks will be repeated over time. So what I'm advised is likely to happen, as I say, is that the site will flood up to that sort of depth for 3 to 5 hours, something like that. Waters will recede, and then 12 hours later, you'll get another sort of ingress of water, but lesser, And there's also an element about how water stays on the site and whether it
Yeah.
all sort of goes away and those things. But I'm confident that that modelling, as I say, we've been through a number of runs of modelling on this site, and I'm confident that that takes into account what it needs to in understanding how that works.
Okay, and the worst times I think for tides are like the spring and the autumn, aren't they? I can't, spring tide, and then there's an autumn tide, which has got some technical term. So it might be happening twice a year and for 3 or 4 occasions at that time, maybe. The 4 high tides across 4 days. Yeah.
And as you'll sort of you'll appreciate the chances of that happening increase through the lifetime of the development.
Yeah.
So,
as the sea level comes up, and presumably because of atmospheric temperatures, storms will be stronger, and so you'll get surges as well.
Yes.
And more rain coming down because the atmosphere holds more water. So they're all going to combine, aren't they?
That's right. And as I say, the modelling, I'm not sure that it's entirely, modelling is modelling. You know, we cannot be entirely certain the modelling is accurate. But as I say, that modelling has been updated a number of times during the course of the application. So it has tried to take into account as much as it possibly can.
Okay, and then I've got a couple more, but one quickie, and then I'll let Fabian's next.
Others may wish to ask the very same thing you're asking, actually.
Yeah,
so.
Lifts.
Yeah.
Lifts and flooding. Obviously, the student accommodation is 17 stories, is it?
At maximum, yeah.
Will lift shafts be impacted by flooding? Has that been considered and modelled in?
To be absolutely honest, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine if you don't know. Thank you, Chair.
You're on mute, Chair.
Sorry, yes. Just to say, Councillor Shah has joined us, but and is replacing Councillor Mead, but he will not be participating in this particular application, participating in the next one. Welcome, Councillor Shah. Councillor Breckles, your question, please.
Yeah, I got a couple. I mean, so the tidal flooding, it's not the feeder that's the issue, it's the Avon which is north of the site. Is that correct?
I think it's a combination, but the feeder is less of an issue as I understand it.
Right, because my initial thoughts were, we've got a high walkway, why not put flood defences underneath? But you've already said that would displace water elsewhere.
Yes, yes.
Okay, what's an AOD, by the way?
That's a level above ordnance datum. So the ordnance datum is measured against New Lynn in Cornwall, I believe. So it's a level above where that level is taken from. It's a level that's used for flood modelling, essentially.
Okay. Finally, change the subject.
Sorry, carry on.
Deed of easement. So that needs to be conditioned. So is that actually in the conditions to the deed of easement to protect motion?
Yes. So I haven't included the conditions on the application. So apologies, I should have said we are asking for delegated powers to finalise those conditions. There is a list of draft conditions which has been going between myself and the applicant's team, and I'm due to meet them again on Friday to discuss those, depending on the results here, obviously. But one of the suggested conditions is for a deed of easement. It just so happens, I think, that in the pack that you got sent round of public consultations, there's a consultation response from Dan Deeks, who's the manager, I think, of Motion, which has got the relevant conditions in, and that's what we're proposing.
Yeah, so would we be able to, if this was to be accepted today, would we be able to condition that that's going to be in? Because I wouldn't want us to condition it and then suddenly find that, you know, oh, there's no deed of easement after all. It fell through the floor.
It is clearly our intention to put that condition on. I guess if members are concerned about it, I will undertake to put the conditions on or report back to the chair if there's any further issues with putting that condition on.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hickman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lewis, for the very excellent presentation. For the point of view of people who live in the area, mainly the Dings, obviously, that's where the main population live, there are real concerns about traffic and pinch points. So, and we can't ignore those. So I just wondered whether Lawrence would just give a really quick overview of that for the members, like you've done, because I appreciate that you couldn't do that, but I think it's really important that we just understand what is and also the plan. I think that's really important for everybody who's going to be living in this area, plus the people who are already going to live there, because they're all planned for the feeder development to go all the way down to the bridge near St George. So lots of traffic.
Do you want me to share the slides, Lawrence?
Yeah, if you've got a wider plan of the area, that would be quite helpful. Thank you.
Not sure, but let me have a look.
Okay, good afternoon, Councillor Hickman. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, Lawrence. Welcome.
Hi there. Yeah, I'll try and put this in as much of a nutshell as I can. But as we're all aware, this is an area of substantial growth. It is recognised in the spatial framework, which came out a couple of years back, or 2016, I think it was. We've since had the university campus. We've since had numerous other proposals, mainly for student accommodation in this area. And if we didn't have a wider area plan of action for this place, then it would be very difficult to try and work out the impacts and how we would mitigate them in this area. So I'll start just with the immediate issues. Silverthorne Lane itself, as Lewis has explained, will be subject to a condition and a fairly substantial Section 278 agreement, which will aim to reduce the impact of traffic in that road. I think it's somewhere in the committee report, but in the immediate vicinity of the school east of Kingsland Road, we would want that to be closed during peak school periods, because the last thing we want people to be dominant down there, not traffic. In terms of the wider area, obviously when we're looking at the university as well, we need to get public transport through here also. What we can't have is public transport being delayed by congestion. So we're going to have to think quite radically about what we do here, but the sort of underpinning objective is to remove through traffic from this area. And that sits very well with development proposals that we're in discussions with coming forward here. Some applications and some are sort of pre-applications. So in terms of going north of here and looking at areas like the Dings, Avon Street, Anvil Street, certainly Anvil Street is not constructed, or nor is the intention for large amounts of additional traffic. We would look to carry on that environment and that theme, certainly in areas like Gas Lane, Kingsland Road, and also Avon Street, because at the moment, I think no one would disagree, it is not inviting for walking and cycling, and is subject to peak hour congestion. People trying to avoid the main routes or the major routes tend to sort of work their way around Albert Road and past here. So our objectives for this area is to stop those sorts of movements and make sure that those that are making the movements in this area are connected with uses in this area and are encouraged to walk and cycle through the environments that we ensure are delivered as part of development. I don't know if that answers everything, but that's a sort of brief summary.
Thank you, Lawrence. No, that's very reassuring. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I ask that councillors lower their hands, please, if when they have no further questions? Thanks very much. Thank you. Are there other questions now? Right. And I have Councillor Stevens again. Welcome, Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. You're very forgiving, really.
I am.
I have two quickies. One is the ferry stop. You said, Lewis, that you couldn't, or you weren't sure how you'd condition that. I think if you could get a ferry stop there, it would be quite useful and might alleviate some of Lawrence's problems with traffic. The second question is coaches to the school, because I'm assuming, especially secondary school, they're going to go and need to go to playing fields and things like that. And so they'll be bussed out. So will there be good access to for coaches to get in there and get out?
Yeah, so in answer to your questions, the ferry stop provision is made on the site for a ferry stop. Obviously, it's a private operator, so we have to use our best endeavours to negotiate with them to stop there, but it's not something that's under the control of the City Council. The coach issue, the scheme has been designed to allow coaches to turn on within plot 5. My understanding is that would be relatively infrequent, but there is a turning head around the listed building essentially, which would allow coaches to turn around there.
Thank you.
I think you seem happy because I have no other hands up. We move now to the debate. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. I have Councillor Eddy, followed by Councillor Wright.
Chairman, I would like to give my full support to this scheme, as well as actually bringing important jobs and business and employment growth. It will bring homes and affordable housing, and of course the invaluable and much needed school. As we've heard from Lewis, we can't redesign this scheme at this stage. In my view, the flooding issues have been addressed pragmatically, and certainly the heritage issues have been addressed. So I have no hesitation in backing this scheme.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Eddy. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll also be supporting these plans, which I think are very important to regenerate this area. I just want to briefly make a couple of points about that. The first is that I want to praise the design of plots 1 to 5. They're all quite nicely done and in sympathy with each other and the surrounding areas. In fact, I think they show that it isn't that difficult to produce good new design in this city, and I look forward to seeing more of this kind of thing and this being used as a bit of a standard. But the second point is to say that I'm a bit disappointed with plot 6, and in particular with the unnecessary 17-storey tower in it, which actually adds nothing to the scheme. There's plenty of space on that plot where those extra floors could have been put instead. I would not have voted for that plot on its own, because I think it's drab and boring and inappropriate in the location. But it's been packaged up with the other 5 plots. I've got to say, I'm unhappy that it's been packaged up like that. It's in order to get it passed effectively. It's done the job, because here I am, I'm about to vote for it. But I sincerely hope that this doesn't become a habit of the council and the planners to get the sort of slightly less desirable plots through.
Thank you, Councillor Goggin.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Lawrence Hill is the second most deprived ward in the city. So to see a brand new state-of-the-art school, housing, cafes, restaurants being built, Also, as was mentioned earlier by one of the public forum, it has a very high ethnic diversity, and again addresses our commitment to providing high-class education to everybody. So I shall be supporting it. Thank you.
Councillor Hickman.
Yeah, I'll be supporting this, but I do just want to echo what Mark said, because I'm sure it's partly because of the really poor development of plot 6 that has actually delayed this coming to planning. And so it's actually delayed a much needed school from being built. And I just wanted to flag that up. I don't know whether that's true, but it's what I understand, and I could be wrong. I accept that totally. But I just think that I think it's really important that this doesn't happen again, because anyone can see that plot 6 is not in keeping. And it was partly why I was asking about the transport, because it's going to impact so hugely on people who live in there already. So I think some reassurance of that from the planners might be a good thing to do, but I will be supporting it.
Councillor Breckles.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I too will be supporting the scheme. I think, I know we all know that the school is desperately needed. And it's good that some of the heritage assets are being preserved. Obviously, the site's been occupied for some time. It's in a deprived area that does need urgent regeneration. And I think, yeah, it's, there are challenges, but I think the good outweighs the bad, and that school is so desperately needed. What I do want to do is make absolutely sure the deed of easement is guaranteed. So I want to be absolutely sure that's going to be in the conditions. So if we could have a report back after if we decide to go for this, a report back just to confirm that that's been done, that would be good.
I will ask the officer to report back to me as chair, I think, just to confirm that that's been done, rather than adding an extra thing onto our agenda, and I'm happy to confirm that with everyone by email later. Councillor Stevens, could others lower their hands, please, if they've spoken? I have Councillor Stevens still.
Thank you. If this was split, I would vote against plot 6. I'd vote for plot 5. Go, 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 go. I like, I think it's 4, which is some of the offices. Certainly the housing, and it's complies, I think, was it 19.7% or something? Overall, I think this is a big game. We have to assume we paid for a load of flood defences. They're going to go in. I'm going to assume that Bristol will have strategic flood defences because of the implications if it doesn't. I think sending this to the Secretary of State is basically saying, government, get your act together about Bristol, or we need money for flood defences. We need to put them in. So therefore, I'm going to vote for this because this starts to force the hand. And on average, it's a good enough scheme. Although, as others have said, packaging it up with plot 6 is poor. So I shall vote for it.
Councillor Davis.
I'd like to propose the officer recommendation.
Seconded.
Thank you. Yeah, just to say myself that I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made, that it's a difficult site, and most of it I feel has been done with great sensitivity to the heritage assets, actually, having walked around them. But plot 6, it's a shame, and I hope that the applicant will yet give some further thought to that and
as part of their long-term relationship with the city. It's good to leave a good taste in everyone's mouth, but I will be voting for this. Councillor Davis has proposed it. Councillor Breckles has seconded it. I'm going to ask Peter just to read out the motion for us, because it's quite a complex one and I want to make sure we're all clear on what we're voting for. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I would just invite you to refer to the amendment sheet that was prepared. And at the bottom of that is the recommendation that this be referred to the Secretary of State. I'm going to read it out in full, that the application, together with responses to the publicity and consultations, the committee report and members' comment, be referred to the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government. If the Secretary of State makes no comment within a 21-day period from receipt of notification, then planning permission is granted. And then, members, I'd invite you to revert back to the committee report, which indicates how that will take place, subject to planning agreement, you'll see, and subject to revocation of the existing hazardous substance consent and a suite of conditions, including the deed of easement condition that Councillor Breckles referred to earlier on. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, so we have a motion, we have a proposer and a seconder. I'm going to go round as I see people on the screen, which may not seem very logical to you, but it is to me. And I'm going to ask for, against, or for you to say for, against, or abstain. Councillor Breckles.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Eddy.
For.
Councillor Wright.
For.
Councillor Hickman.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Goggin.
For.
And myself for. You have that. So we have a unanimous approval of that application. Thank you very much. We now move on. Thank you particularly while he's still here to Lawrence, but also especially to Lewis for the enormous amount of work this has been to him. It's, yeah, I won't say any more than that, but thank you very much, both of you. I have one public foot right. The next item on the agenda then is it's West Street. So it's 18/06186/F 90 West Street, St Phillips. And we have one public forum statement, and that is from Mr. Nick Morley. Welcome, Mr. Morley. Could all councillors please lower their virtual hands? Thank you. Mr. Morley, I believe you can hear us and we can hear you. Mr. Morley? Mr. Morley? Can you connect to audio, please? Mr. Morley, can you hear us? In fact, we can't see Mr. Morley.
He keeps coming in and out, so there's obviously something wrong with the Wi-Fi, I'd say.
There is. Okay. We will just try to contact Mr. Morley very quickly. Let us take the officer report. We've had Mr. Morley's statement, so he's in the waiting room again now. Mr. Morley, can you hear us now? Can we can see you. Mr. Morley, you are muted, but I think you're with us. Unmute, please.
Is that fine now?
Yes, wonderful. You have 1 minute, Mr. Morley, please. You actually had about 3 or 4 without speaking.
Yeah, sorry about that. I left the meeting.
I won't subtract it from your time. Harder than wood.
Sorry,
Please.
I left the meeting in error. That's my fault.
No problem. You're very welcome. Carry on.
I'm just going to really just run through what's changed since the last committee meeting. Obviously, I put quite a long statement in. The last committee meeting, there was discussions about bedrooms, dual aspect and height were the main issues. We did talk about acoustics for a while, but I think that was resolved as far as it could be. So since that meeting, I've reviewed the interior of the building, interior design, added an additional staircase, which I think was mentioned at the meeting. That allows all the bedrooms to be located at the rear, providing a second staircase. It also allows for 3 more flats to be dual aspect. So that's 3/4 of the flats are now dual aspect, where approximately half were before. So I think that's quite a big improvement. I thank the councillors for that. I think that's made quite a big difference, really. The staircases are ample for circulation and general use of the building as well. There was discussion about the height of the building towards the end of the meeting. I've brought the councillors' attention to development at 61 to 67 West Street, which is 5 stories, and you can see the 5th floor from West Street. That was in my statement. I also included a small model of the proposal at 90 West Street, and you can see that the top floor tends to recede from view because of the nature of the mansard roof. So I think in both developments, the 5th floor is fairly concealed from the street because the street itself is quite narrow for views anyway. I think that's more or less all I've got to say, really. There's been quite a lot of communication between myself and the planning officer during the last month or so as well. So I'm hoping that councillors will agree this scheme is improved and support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morley. And thank you for listening to our comments last time when the application was brought to us. I will hand over now to our case officer. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Chair. I'm just going to try and share my screen so I can do this presentation. Right, can everybody see PowerPoint?
Yes, that's there.
Okay. Right, excellent. So yeah, this is being deferred from a previous committee A, I believe on design grounds, namely on the element of lack of dual aspect units and bedrooms facing West Street. So we're looking at a redesigned submission. So as previously mentioned, 90 West Street, the proposal is for 12 flats in addition to the 2 existing 2 retail units, and run additional story to 90 West Street. So we've got the site here just to recap on the junction. You've got the Trinity Centre here and the former police station here. This is the site here. So existing buildings there. The rest of the site is pretty much used as a sort of car parking. Got a picture of the existing premises and site. So vacant restaurant on the ground floor, 2 flats above. This is looking back from the traffic island. and you can see a corner building here on West Street and Braggs Lane, sort of heights you've got opposite. Just moving back further, and this is looking into the site, so it's not really much use apart from parking there. This is the site on the right, Trinity Centre there, and then this is looking along West Street on the same side, opposite directly, and I think it's 61 to 67, the building with the scaffolding, permission from about 3 years ago that's nearing completion. It's 4-storey with a 5th story on the top, which is set back. You can just see there. So that would be a similar height to this proposal. Bearing in mind this is a corner plot. So looking at the plans, you can see the extent of the proposed site. It would take up most of the unused land to the side, and then there'll be amenity space at the rear. Front elevation, not a lot's changed here from the previous scheme that was brought to committee. I believe there's an extra door here that allows access to the second staircase. Rear elevation, very similar to before. Side elevation, you've got the billboard there. The windows, which aren't windows on the side, still remain. That's the other side. So you're looking at the heights in comparison to the adjacent buildings. So moving on to the floor plans, what's changed then is we have this additional staircase here on the ground floor. There's a slight reduction to the retail unit, this retail unit, yeah, we've had a slight widening to this access here for the bin store to meet sort of TDM standards. Moving up, we've got the first floor here. Now, I believe previously there was a central corridor which allowed circulation for access via one staircase. Now we've got two. There's corridor space which has been reduced now to increase the efficiency of the space in the unit. So we've got all the units meeting space standards. And I believe there is 75% dual aspect opposed to 50% before. You've got single aspect on 2 units, which I believe are the 1-bed units. That's floor 1, floor 2, and then floor 3. So I'll basically end the presentation, and I will confirm that we would be recommending approval subject to condition. We believe it's an improvement to the previous scheme. There was a scheme suggested by the Old Market Neighbourhood Development Form, which I can comment on further if you've got any further questions on, but we are determining the scheme before us. And I'll hand you back to the chair now. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions then, please, if you have questions. No? Well, that is okay. Councillor Hickman.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I think it's great how the developer really listened to our concerns, and I sort of honour us for addressing them during the meeting the other week. I don't know whether it's worth us hearing what the Old Market Association were proposing. I mean, it's slightly different, but I think because the developer has actually listened and changed, and actually there's now dual aspect. I mean, this might be a discussion, sorry. Anyway, I just wanted to ask people the question about whether people would be interested to hear about the Old Market thing proposal.
Doesn't seem to be many people know, to be brutally honest.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to ask the question, Don.
Oh, well, no, nobody's jumping up. It's very difficult to gauge, Councillor Hickman, from here, but I don't see any, yeah, but thank you for the offer. I move on. Councillor Stevens.
So this is discussion now, yes?
Questions?
I have no questions.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? No. In that case, we do move to discussion, and we start with you, Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. I didn't want to see the old market design. I read a bit about it, but we've been trained to just consider the design that's in front of us, and we developed that at length in the last application. So unless they put a planning application in, we'll just stick with what we have in front of us. And I'd like to agree with Mark. I'm very impressed with the developer or site owner. They listened to the comments from last time, done well. The bedroom's at the back now. I'd like to thank him, if he's still there and listening, for doing that. I think you've got a much better proposal, and I'm going to support it.
Thank you. I'm sure, like much of the city, is watching us on YouTube at this very moment. Councillor Breckles.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I too will be supporting this. I also want to put on record my thanks to the developers who are actually listening to us. I mean, you know, I was really concerned about, you know, flats that were sort of single aspect, you know, all the bedrooms on the front. This is a much, much better scheme. You know, it's so nice when you actually give developers feedback and actually act on it and come back with, you know, something that is now does the job. I don't have a problem with the height, because if you look at the buildings opposite coming in, they are pretty huge. So if it'll sort of match the gateway at the start, it'll provide a gateway, the two properties coming into West Street. So for me, it's a no-brainer, and I will be supporting it. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Eddy.
Chairman, obviously I'm a sub, so I wasn't here before, but this seems a great improvement on the original plans. I'll be backing it.
Thank you. Councillor Shah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo what Councillor Hickman and others have said, and this is in the neighbouring ward, and so I know the area quite well, and just to say that it's quite refreshing to see that the developer has actually listened, gone back to the drawing board, and come back and we can tick these boxes. I too have no concerns about the height of this application, and I will be supporting it. I like the fact that they've come back and made a real effort to actually make good on those comments which we made at the previous meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Goggin.
Yeah, just echoing what everybody's been saying, really. So often we get developers responding by just changing semantics or trying to technically get around things. So yeah, well done, and I'll be supporting it. Shall I move that we accept the officer's recommendation?
Could I just ask, please, that people put down their hands if they've finished, and I'll just ask if there's any further questions for anyone, or any further discussion, sorry. Anyone wish to comment any further, or can I accept Councillor Goggin's motion? Okay.
Mike.
Councillor Goggin proposes the acceptance of the officer's recommendation to approve. Councillor Davis seconds that. I will now go around and ask for your for, against, or abstain in the order in which I see you on my screen. Councillor Breckles.
For.
Councillor Eddy.
For.
Councillor Wright.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Shah.
For.
Councillor Hickman.
For.
Councillor Goggin.
For.
Myself, 4. That makes unanimous approval. Thank you, everybody. Particular thank you to all officers, including IT, Democratic Services, and Peter, especially for standing in today. And just to remind everyone that our next meeting is on Wednesday, the 2nd of September at 2 p.m. Thank you and goodbye.